The military hospital sat at the edge of the base like an afterthought. Concrete walls bleached pale by the sun, narrow windows reinforced with mesh, a place designed to endure explosions, not attention. It had no grand entrance, no flags waving dramatically out front, just floodlights, cameras, and a guard who waved vehicles through without looking up from his clipboard. Inside, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and recycled oxygen. Night shift had begun. The corridors were quieter than they ever were during the day, but quiet didn't mean calm. Machines hummed in steady rhythms. Monitors pulsed green and amber. Somewhere deep in the building, a generator vibrated through the floor like a distant heartbeat. Amelia moved through it all without hurry. She carried herself the way people do when they've learned that rushing only creates mistakes. Her steps were measured, her posture relaxed but balanced, weight evenly distributed, as if she were always ready to stop or move fast without warning. She wore light blue scrubs, the standard kind issued to every nurse on base. No custom fit, no alterations. Her shoes were practical, worn just enough to show she actually worked in them. Her hair was pulled back tight into a knot that would stay in place no matter how long the shift ran. Nothing about her looked exceptional. That was why no one remembered when she arrived. She had been transferred in 2 weeks earlier, during a stretch of routine rotations when paperwork piled up and attention thinned. The administrator who signed her in barely glanced at her file. "Another nurse," he muttered at the time. "Good. We're short. No welcome briefing. No tour beyond a quick gesture down the main hall. ER's that way. Trauma wings restricted unless called. Don't wander." Amelia nodded and thanked him. She always thanked people. Now, as she checked the vitals of a Marine sleeping through painkillers, she adjusted the IV flow by a fraction most people wouldn't have noticed mattered. The monitor settled. She moved on. At the nurse's station, 2 doctors leaned against the counter, coffee cups in hand, speaking in the loose confidence of people who'd never been overruled in their lives. "Command's sending another inspection team next month," one said. "Like we don't already know how to run a hospital." The other snorted. "They'll nitpick inventory and leave. Same as always." They glanced at Amelia as she passed. One of them frowned. "You're new, right?" "Yes, sir." "Try not to change anything," he said. "We have systems." Amelia paused just long enough to meet his eyes. "Yes, sir," she said again. She continued down the hall. Behind her, one of the interns whispered, "She even walks like she's scared to be noticed." The comment earned a few quiet laughs. Amelia didn't react. In Trauma Room 3, a young Marine sat upright on the gurney, jaw clenched, sweat beating at his temples despite the cool air. His arm was wrapped in gauze darkened by blood. "You good?" she asked him quietly as she checked the dressing. "I've been better," he said. "Doc said it's nothing." She didn't comment. She peeled back the edge of the bandage just enough to see. Her fingers paused. She rewrapped it carefully. "It's not nothing," she said, voice calm. "But you'll keep the arm." He exhaled in relief he hadn't realized he was holding. "Thank you," he said. She nodded and moved on. At the end of the corridor, Amelia stopped. Not abruptly. Not enough for anyone to notice. She simply lingered for a moment, eyes lifting to the security camera mounted in the corner where the ceiling met the wall. It was operational. The one across from it was not. She filed that away. Downstairs in administration, an argument was unfolding. "She's not cleared for advanced trauma response," an administrator snapped, tapping Amelia's file with irritation. "Why is she even on night shift?" A charge nurse shrugged. "Because we needed bodies." She spoke up during rounds earlier. She pointed out a vitals trend, the nurse said. She wasn't wrong. "That's not the point," the administrator replied sharply. "She doesn't have the authority." The word hung in the air like something heavy. By the time Amelia returned to the station, the argument had already shaped her future. The head physician barely looked at her when he spoke. "Stick to assigned tasks," he said. "Leave diagnosis and decisions to those trained for it." Amelia nodded once. "Yes, sir." She turned back to her charting. No one noticed that she had already marked 3 potential complications before they appeared on any screen. The base outside was unusually still. Wind dragged sand along the perimeter fence. The watchtower lights cast long shadows that shifted slowly, like the base itself was breathing. A pair of Marines at the gate joked about how boring the night was shaping up to be. Inside the hospital, a low-level alarm chimed and stopped. Amelia looked up. It was the kind of alert that triggered for calibration errors or sensor hiccups. Nothing worth reacting to. Amelia's hand stilled over the keyboard. She listened, not to the sound itself, but to what followed. The absence, the way the background noise didn't return to its exact previous rhythm. She stood and walked toward the supply room. A young nurse watched her go. "Where are you headed?" she asked. "Restocking," Amelia said. The supply room was empty. She closed the door gently behind her and stood still, eyes adjusting to the dim light. She breathed in, then out. The building was changing, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the way structures do right before something breaks. Far away, beyond the hospital walls, an engine idled where it shouldn't have been. Amelia opened a cabinet and checked its contents. Exactly where she'd left them. She closed it again. When she stepped back into the corridor, the lights flickered. Just once. Someone laughed nervously. "Generator hiccup," a tech called out. Amelia didn't slow down. She walked toward the ER doors as the night tightened around the hospital, unseen and unacknowledged, gathering momentum. And somewhere beyond the perimeter, armed men were already moving. The first sign that something was wrong came quietly. Not a shout, not an explosion, just a subtle shift in the hospital's rhythm. The generator hum dipped by half a tone, then corrected itself. Monitors stuttered and resumed. Overhead lights dimmed for a fraction of a second, not long enough to trigger alarms, but long enough for anyone paying attention to feel it. Most people weren't. The ER staff laughed it off. Someone joked about the base running on duct tape and prayers. A tech slapped the side of a monitor like it was an old television. Amelia paused mid-step. Her eyes moved, not fast, not panicked, tracking exits, corners, reflections in glass. She noticed the way 2 Marines near triage unconsciously shifted their stance, hands closer to their weapons, without realizing why. She approached the charge nurse. "Has perimeter control reported in recently?" Amelia asked. The charge nurse frowned. "Why?" "Just asking." The nurse glanced toward the desk phone. "Security checks in every hour. Nothing's come through." Amelia nodded. She didn't push. Instead, she turned and walked toward the stairwell that led down to the ambulance bay. She didn't take it. She just stood at the landing for a moment, listening. Metal scraped faintly against concrete. Too deliberate to be wind. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She went back upstairs. At the nurse's station, an administrator was mid-rant, his voice carrying down the hall. "I don't care how short-staffed we are," he snapped. "Protocol exists for a reason. If someone doesn't have clearance, they don't act." Amelia passed without comment. Inside Trauma Room 2, a Marine lay hooked to monitors, chest rising unevenly. He was unconscious, his skin pale beneath the harsh lights. The chart at the foot of the bed listed his status as stable. Amelia studied the waveform on the cardiac monitor. It wasn't stable. It was compensating. She adjusted his oxygen, then stepped out into the hall and flagged down the attending physician. "Sir," she said calmly, "his blood pressure is holding, but his respiration pattern suggests internal bleeding." The physician barely slowed. "We've already scanned him," he replied. "It's clean." "With respect," Amelia said, matching his pace. "The scan was 30 minutes ago. His vitals are trending." "I said it's clean," he cut in sharply. "We don't chase ghosts because a new nurse feels uneasy." A couple of interns smirked. Amelia stopped walking. "Yes, sir," she said. She turned back toward the room. Behind her, the physician muttered, "Jesus, everyone thinks they're a hero." Inside, Amelia repositioned the Marine, adjusting his angle by just a few degrees. His breathing eased slightly. She stayed with him longer than required. Down in security, the radio crackled. Static. A Marine tapped the receiver. Perimeter east, report. Nothing. He tried again. Perimeter east, check in. Still nothing. He frowned and glanced at the camera feeds. Most were grainy thanks to wind-blown sand, but movement flickered near the outer fence. Probably wildlife, he muttered. Then the feed went dark. The first gunshot came from outside the hospital. It was muffled by distance and reinforced walls, but it carried a sharp finality that cut through the night. Someone at the nurse's station looked up. Was that? Before the question finished, the fire alarm chirped once and stopped. Amelia was already moving. She stepped into the corridor and caught the eye of a Marine sprinting towards security. Lockdown triage, she said quietly. The Marine hesitated. Ma'am? Now, Amelia repeated. Not louder, just firmer. Something in her tone snapped him into motion. He ran. A second gunshot echoed closer this time. Screams followed. The hospital exploded into chaos. Marines shouted commands. Boots thundered across tile. A stretcher overturned. Somewhere, glass shattered. Contact! Contact! Someone yelled. Amelia grabbed the nearest gurney and shoved it sideways, creating cover where there had been none. She pulled a tech down behind it, just as rounds punched into the wall where he'd been standing. Stay down, she said, pressing him flat. Her voice never rose. Doctors froze in doorways, stunned by how fast the night had turned. Get the patients out, an administrator screamed. Get them out! To where? Someone shouted back. The answer came in the form of armed men bursting through the ambulance bay doors. They moved with purpose, coordinated. Not desperate, it was an operation. Amelia saw it instantly. She ducked into a side corridor as bullets tore through signage and shattered lights. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking. A Marine went down near the nurse's station, blood spreading fast. Amelia slid to his side. Stay with me, she said. Hands already working. Tourniquet out before anyone realized she carried one. Medic! Someone screamed. I've got him, Amelia said. She sealed the wound in seconds. Pressure perfect, movements efficient. The Marine's breathing steadied. She looked up. 2 armed men were advancing down the hall, rifles raised. Amelia stood, not to fight, to move. She sprinted down a maintenance corridor. Most of the staff didn't know existed, boots barely making a sound. She reached a locked door, keyed in a code without hesitation, and slipped inside. The room beyond was dark, cold, storage. She reached beneath a shelf and pulled out a sealed case. Inside, not medical equipment. Something else. She paused only long enough to exhale. Then the hospital shook as an explosion rocked the far wing. Alarms screamed. Overhead, a voice boomed through the intercom, panicked and untrained. All personnel, this is not a drill. The transmission cut out. Amelia stepped back into the corridor as Marines regrouped, dragging wounded to cover, firing down hallways they couldn't see. One of the armed men rounded a corner and froze when he saw her. For just a second, confusion flickered in his eyes. She wasn't who he expected. That second was enough. The shot was precise, final. The man dropped. Silence rippled outward. A Marine stared at her. What the hell? Move, Amelia said, already stepping past him. More attackers poured in. The hospital had become a battlefield, and the nurse they'd dismissed had just changed the odds. The body hit the floor hard. For half a second, no one moved. The Marine nearest Amelia stared at the fallen attacker, then back at her. His expression caught somewhere between shock and disbelief. Ma'am, he started. Cover the corridor, Amelia said. Not shouted, not pleaded. Stated. The Marine reacted before he realized he was obeying. He raised his rifle and took position as more Marines rushed in behind him, boots slipping on polished tile streaked with blood and sprinkler water. Gunfire echoed again. Closer now. Louder. The sound multiplied inside the concrete hallways, bouncing unpredictably, turning direction into guesswork. Smoke rolled low along the floor. Somewhere in the chaos, a doctor screamed for security. Another shouted for protocol. Someone else yelled for God. Amelia moved against the flow. She cut through a side passage, ducked under a dangling cable sparking against the wall, and slid into a treatment room where two nurses huddled behind an overturned bed. "Stay here," she told them. "Don't move unless I come back." One of them grabbed her sleeve. "You can't go out there." Amelia gently removed the hand. "Yes," she said, "I can." She stepped back into the hall. An explosion rocked the far end of the building. Ceiling tiles rained down. A fire alarm howled continuously now, its pitch blending with screams and gunfire, until the sound became almost physical. The attackers were pushing deeper. They weren't random. They weren't panicking. They were clearing rooms. A Marine squad tried to counter from the stairwell and was immediately pinned down by disciplined, overlapping fire. "This isn't right," one of them muttered into his radio. "They're moving like professionals." Amelia reached the junction near radiology and stopped. She listened. Footsteps, 3 sets, heavy boots, coordinated spacing. She pressed herself flat against the wall, waited until the lead attacker crossed the invisible line she'd already measured, then moved. 2 shots, controlled, minimal recoil. Both men went down before the third realized what was happening. He turned too late. Silence followed. Amelia exhaled once. She didn't look at the bodies. She was already moving again. Down in triage, doctors were arguing. "We can't move him," one shouted, gesturing at a gurney where a Marine lay pale and motionless. "If we disconnect him, he dies. If we don't move him, he dies anyway," another yelled back. "They're coming this way." Amelia skidded into the room. She took in the scene in one glance. The Marine on the bed wore no visible rank, but everything about him, the scars, the posture, even unconscious, the quiet way other Marines instinctively gave him space, marked him as something more. A Navy SEAL, badly wounded. Blood soaked the sheets beneath him. His breathing was shallow, uneven. The monitor screamed warnings no one was addressing. "What's his status?" Amelia asked. A surgeon turned on her sharply. "Who are you?" "Answer the question." "He's unstable," the surgeon snapped. "Internal bleeding. We're waiting on clearance to operate." "Waiting on who?" Amelia demanded. "Command," the administrator barked. "This is a high-value patient. We don't act without authorization." Another explosion shook the building. The lights flickered. Someone screamed from the hallway. Amelia stepped closer to the bed. She checked the Marine's pupils, his pulse, the pressure building beneath his ribs. "He doesn't have time," she said. The surgeon blocked her path. "Get away from him." Amelia looked at him. Really looked. "You can either move," she said evenly, "or I will move you." The surgeon laughed, sharp and incredulous. "You think you're in charge?" "No," Amelia replied. "I think he's dying." She reached for the equipment. Hands grabbed her arms. "That's enough," the administrator shouted. "You're done. Step back. Now." For the first time that night, Amelia hesitated. Not out of fear, out of calculation. The gunfire was closer now. The attackers were almost at triage. Amelia made her decision. She shoved the administrator aside with controlled force. Not enough to injure, just enough to clear space. And climbed onto the gurney. "What are you doing?" someone screamed. Amelia didn't answer. She opened the kit. Her hands moved with speed and certainty that didn't come from textbooks. She made an incision where no one else had dared, fingers finding landmarks by feel not sight. The monitor wailed. The surgeon swore. "You'll kill him." Amelia didn't look up. "Apply pressure," she said to a stunned intern. "Here, now." Blood poured, then slowed as Amelia worked, her movements precise, efficient, almost surgical in their calm. Outside the room, gunfire erupted again. A Marine slammed the door shut and braced it with his shoulder. "How long?" he shouted. 2 minutes, Amelia replied. She sealed the rupture, stabilized the bleed just enough, then slid off the gurney. The Marine's vitals steadied. The room went quiet. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the administrator rounded on her. "You are finished here," he said, voice shaking with rage. "You violated every protocol we have." "Then fire me," Amelia said. She turned away from the bed. The surgeon stared at the monitor, disbelief creeping into his face as the numbers held. Outside, the gunfire abruptly stopped. Not faded. Stopped heavy boots thundered down the corridor. A voice rang out, authoritative, controlled. "Clear the hall. Now." Marines snapped to attention, weapons lowering as a squad in full gear swept past them with practiced efficiency. At their center walked a man in civilian clothes, flanked by armed escorts. He took in the scene in a glance. The damage, the bodies, the blood. His eyes stopped on Amelia, then moved to the Marine on the gurney, then back to her. "Who stabilized him?" he asked. No one answered. The administrator found his voice. "This nurse acted without authorization." The man raised a hand. "Not you," he said calmly. He looked at the Marine guarding the door. "Who saved him?" The Marine swallowed. "Her." Then he turned to Amelia and said quietly, "Ma'am, step outside." The administrator smiled tightly. Amelia removed her gloves and set them down. She walked out of the room. She didn't see the looks that followed her. She didn't hear the whispered questions spreading through the hospital like electricity. Who is she? The hallway outside triage felt colder than the rest of the hospital. Not in temperature, in attention. Every eye followed Amelia as she walked, flanked by two Marines who looked deeply uncomfortable escorting her. They didn't touch her. They didn't need to. She went willingly, hands relaxed at her sides, steps unhurried despite the chaos still echoing through the building. Behind them, the doors to triage slammed shut. Inside, the SEAL's monitors continued their steady rhythm. Outside, Amelia was being treated like a problem that needed to be contained. The man in civilian clothes stopped near a reinforced window overlooking the courtyard. Helicopter rotors thumped in the distance, growing louder. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. The hallway outside triage felt colder than the rest of the hospital. Not in temperature, in attention. Every eye followed Amelia as she walked, flanked by two Marines who looked deeply uncomfortable escorting her. They didn't touch her. They didn't need to. She went willingly, hands relaxed at her sides, steps unhurried despite the chaos still echoing through the building. Behind them, the doors to triage slammed shut. Inside, the SEAL's monitors continued their steady rhythm. Outside, Amelia was being treated like a problem that needed to be contained. The man in civilian clothes stopped near a reinforced window overlooking the courtyard. Helicopter rotors thumped in the distance, growing louder. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You broke protocol," he said. "Yes," Amelia replied. "You assaulted an administrator." "I moved him." "You performed an unauthorized invasive procedure." "I stopped the bleeding." His gaze sharpened. "You understand that people have been court-martialed for less." Amelia met his eyes evenly. "I understand," she said. He exhaled slowly. "What you did," he continued, "will be reviewed at the highest levels." Amelia nodded. "I expect nothing less." The man watched her carefully, as if trying to find something. Arrogance, defiance, fear. He found none. Behind them, the administrator emerged from triage, red-faced and furious. "She has no clearance," he snapped. "No authority. I want her removed from this facility immediately." The man in civilian clothes didn't look at him. "Name," he said instead, still watching Amelia. "Amelia?" she replied. "Last name?" "Amelia is sufficient," the administrator scoffed. "This isn't a game." The man finally turned his head. "Neither is what just happened," he said quietly. The administrator faltered. The helicopter landed with a roar that shook the glass. Armed personnel poured into the courtyard, moving with speed and precision that made it clear the hospital was no longer in civilian control. A Marine approached at a jog. "Sir," he said to the man in civilian clothes, "perimeter is secure, all hostiles neutralized, or captured? The man nodded once. Then he turned back to Amelia. For now, he said, you're relieved of duty. Amelia removed her badge without comment and handed it over. The administrator's smile widened. You'll wait here, the man added. Do not leave. Amelia nodded. She leaned against the wall and folded her arms loosely, eyes drifting toward the courtyard where the helicopter rotor slowly spun down. Inside, adrenaline drained from her system, leaving behind the familiar ache. Old injuries reminding her they were still there. A Marine guard stood a few feet away, shifting awkwardly. After a moment, he cleared his throat. Ma'am, he said quietly, for what it's worth, thank you. Amelia looked at him. Take care of them, she said instead. He straightened. Yes, ma'am. Minutes stretched. Voices echoed from down the hall. Sharp, clipped conversations behind closed doors. Radios crackled with updates that didn't include her. Amelia waited. Eventually, footsteps approached. Heavier this time, more deliberate. The man in civilian clothes returned, flanked by two uniformed officers whose presence shifted the air immediately. One wore Navy insignia, the other something higher. They stopped in front of Amelia. Neither smiled. Amelia, the senior officer said, testing the name like it carried weight. Yes, sir. You're going to tell us exactly how you knew what to do, the administrator snapped from behind them. The officer didn't even glance at him. No, he said, she's not. The administrator froze. Excuse me? The officer turned slowly. You will be silent unless spoken to. The administrator's face drained of color. The Navy officer studied Amelia closely now, eyes sharp, assessing. You recognized the patient immediately, he said. Before anyone told you who he was. Amelia said nothing. You knew how to stabilize an injury that most surgeons won't attempt in field. Still, nothing. And you operated under fire without hesitation. The officer's jaw tightened. Where did you learn to do that? Amelia's gaze drifted past him, toward the closed doors of triage. Somewhere noisy, she said. The Navy officer exhaled through his nose. That tracks. The man in civilian clothes stepped forward. Sir, he said to the senior officer, her file doesn't exist in any system I can access. The officer nodded slowly. That's because you're not supposed to access it. The administrator sputtered. This is ridiculous. She's a nurse. Yes, the officer said. She is. He turned back to Amelia. Did you think this would stay buried? He asked quietly. Amelia met his gaze. I hoped, she said, it wouldn't matter. For the first time, something like respect crossed his face. Behind them, the doors to triage opened. The surgeon stepped out, his expression shaken. He's stable, he said. We're prepping for transport. The Navy officer closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. When he opened them again, he looked at Amelia differently. You saved a SEAL's life tonight, he said. That carries weight. The administrator scoffed. By breaking every rule we have, and you would have let him die waiting for permission. Silence crushed the hallway. The officer faced Amelia once more. You're coming with us, he said. Amelia nodded. Of course. As they walked, Marines along the corridor straightened subtly. Some looked at her with awe, others with confusion. No one laughed anymore. They reached a secure room near command. Classified. He slid it across the table. Your past, he said, is no longer a secret. Amelia rested her hands on the table. She didn't open the folder. Outside, the hospital settled into a strange, fragile quiet. The worst was over. The truth was just beginning. The room smelled faintly of metal and stale coffee. No windows, reinforced walls, a single overhead light that cast hard shadows across the table. The kind of room designed for conversations that were never meant to leave it. Amelia sat across from the officers, hands folded loosely in front of her. She did not reach for the folder. The Navy officer studied her for a long moment before opening it himself. Inside were documents that didn't look like normal records. Sparse text, heavy redactions, Dates without locations. Missions listed only as numbers. Medical evaluations stamped with seals that meant clearance far above anything in this hospital. The administrator stood near the door, arms crossed tightly, his earlier confidence gone. "This is a mistake," he muttered. "There's no way." The senior officer silenced him with a glance. "She served," the officer said calmly, "longer than most, harder than many." The administrator scoffed weakly. "As what? A medic?" The Navy officer didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid one page forward and turned it so the administrator could read. The administrator leaned in, then froze. His face drained of color. "That's not," he started. "That is," the officer said, "and that's only the part we're allowed to acknowledge." He turned his attention back to Amelia. "You disappeared after your last deployment," he said. "No discharge ceremony. No public record. You re-entered the system as a civilian medical professional." Amelia nodded. "I changed uniforms," she said quietly. "You didn't change who you are," the officer replied. Outside the room, a Marine stood guard, listening to nothing and everything at once. Inside, the administrator finally found his voice again. "You let a combat operator near my patient," he said, desperation creeping in, "without informing anyone. That's a liability." The Navy officer stood. "Lieutenant Commander," he said coldly, "the only liability in that room was your hesitation." The administrator swallowed. "She's not cleared to work here." He tried again. The officer turned fully toward him now. "She is cleared wherever lives are on the line." Silence followed. The Navy officer sat back down and looked at Amelia. "Why nursing?" he asked. Amelia considered the question. "Because when I wore the other uniform," she said, "everything I touched broke. I wanted to fix things," she continued. "Not just end threats, not just survive them." "You could have stayed retired," he said. "Yes. Why didn't you?" Amelia's gaze dropped briefly to the table. "Because people still bleed the same way," she said. "And someone has to be there when it happens." The room was quiet again. Finally, the officer closed the folder. "Your actions tonight saved lives," he said. "You'll face questions, reviews, but you will not be punished." The administrator shook his head. "This is unbelievable." The officer stood again. "Get used to it." He turned to Amelia. "The seal you stabilized," he said, "asked for you." Amelia looked up. "He's conscious." "Briefly," the officer replied. "Long enough to say your name." She closed her eyes for a moment, not from pride, from relief. They escorted her back through the hospital. The corridors looked different now, not because they'd changed, but because the people in them had. Marines stood straighter as she passed. Some nodded. One whispered a quiet "ma'am," like it meant something new. She reached the doorway to the ICU, where the seal lay. The surgeon stood aside without a word. Inside, the room was dim, lit mostly by monitor glow. The seal lay still, tubes and lines tracing his body like a map of survival. His eyes flickered open when she approached. For a moment, recognition flared. Then he smiled faintly. "Took you long enough," he rasped. Amelia leaned in. "You're alive," she said. "Because you ignored them?" he replied. She adjusted his blanket. "Rest," she said. "You're not done yet." Neither of them said what they were really thinking. They didn't need to. Outside, the administrator watched through the glass, realization sinking in too late. He hadn't dismissed a nurse. He had dismissed a shield. Later that night, the hospital returned to its steady hum. The alarm stopped, the wounded were stabilized. The dead were removed quietly, respectfully. Amelia stood alone in the supply room again, washing blood from her hands. They were shaking now. She let them. When she finished, she dried them carefully and rejoined the ward. A young nurse approached hesitantly. "They're saying things," she whispered. Amelia met her eyes. "Let them," she said. The nurse nodded. "What will you do now?" Amelia glanced down the hall, where Marines rested under clean sheets. "I'll finish my shift," she said. And she did. Dawn arrived without ceremony. The desert sky lightened from black to deep blue, then to a pale gray that crept through the narrow hospital windows. Outside, the base began to stir again. Boots on gravel, engines turning over, radios crackling with routine that felt almost disrespectful after the night that had passed. Inside the hospital, the air was heavy with exhaustion, the kind that settled into bones. Amelia moved through the ward as she always did, finishing the shift she'd started before everything broke. She checked vitals, adjusted medication schedules, replaced IV bags with hands that were steady again, as if the tremor had never happened. But people watched her now. Not openly, not rudely, just enough to let her feel it. The surgeon who had shouted at her the night before stood near the nurse's station, staring down at a chart he wasn't really reading. When Amelia approached, he stepped aside without comment. An intern followed her with wide eyes. "You knew," he finally said, unable to hold it in. "You knew what was wrong with him before any of us." Amelia stopped. She didn't turn. "Knowing isn't the same as acting," she said. "Remember that." He nodded, as if she'd handed him something fragile. In the ICU, the SEAL slept under sedation. His color had improved. His vitals were steady in a way that made experienced doctors exhale without realizing they'd been holding their breath. A Marine stood watch outside the room, arms crossed, rifle slung. When Amelia passed, he straightened. "Ma'am." She paused. "How is he?" "Alive," the Marine said. "Command says that's because of you." Amelia nodded once and moved on. In administration, the atmosphere was brittle. The administrator sat at his desk, staring at his reflection in the dark computer monitor. He had already received 3 calls he couldn't answer and 1 email marked urgent that he hadn't opened. His authority, the thing he'd relied on more than competence, had been exposed for what it was. Temporary. He watched through the glass as Amelia walked the corridor again, calm, professional, unremarkable. And it terrified him. By mid-morning, the delegation arrived. No sirens, no ceremony. Just black vehicles rolling through the gate and stopping where they were expected. The hospital staff felt it immediately. Conversations dropped in volume. Movements became precise. Everyone suddenly remembered their posture. Amelia was in a patient room when the senior officer found her. "Amelia," he said quietly from the doorway. She finished adjusting the monitor before turning. "Yes, sir. They're asking for you." She nodded. "I assumed they would." The conference room felt smaller than it had the night before. More people now. More rank. Less patience. Questions came in careful phrases, stripped of accusation but heavy with implication. Where did you train? Who authorized your placement here? Why didn't your record flag during transfer? Amelia answered what she could. "I was cleared," she said. "I followed medical necessity. I didn't think it would matter." Some of them didn't. One man leaned forward, fingers stippled. "You're aware," he said, "that by acting as you did, you undermined the hospital's chain of command." Amelia met his gaze. "I upheld it," she replied. "Just not the part written on paper." Silence followed. Then another officer spoke. Older, quieter. "How many lives would have been lost if you hadn't acted?" No one answered. They didn't need to. The meeting ended without a verdict. They always did. Outside, the sun climbed higher. Amelia returned to the ward. The young Marine she'd treated early in the night caught sight of her and smiled weakly. "You're still here," he said. "So are you," she replied. "That seems important." He laughed softly, then winced. "It is," he agreed. Later, as the shift change approached, the charge nurse approached Amelia, hesitating like someone standing at the edge of a pool they weren't sure was cold. "They want to know if you're staying on," she said. Amelia considered the question. Around them, the hospital breathed, wounded healing, system stabilizing, people pretending they weren't changed. "For now," Amelia said, "until someone else needs the spot." The charge nurse nodded, relief and uncertainty tangled together. As Amelia signed off her charts, she paused at the end of the page. Her name looked small there. She capped the pen and stood. Outside the ICU, the SEAL stirred. His eyes opened slowly, focusing with effort. When he saw Amelia, he frowned. "They still mad at you?" he asked hoarsely. She allowed herself the smallest smile. "They're thinking," she said. "Good," he replied. "Thinking gets people killed less often." She adjusted his IV and leaned closer. "You're going to recover," she told him, "but it's going to hurt." He nodded. "Worth it." As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "Amelia, next time," he said, voice steady despite everything, "don't wait for permission." "I never do," she said. That evening, as the sun dipped and the desert cooled, Amelia stepped outside the hospital for the first time since the attack. The air smelled of dust and fuel. Marines moved along the perimeter, alert but calmer now. One of them nodded at her. Not a salute, not quite. Something else. Respect, maybe. Amelia pulled her jacket tighter and looked out across the base. She knew this wouldn't be the end. It never was. But for now, the hospital stood. The wounded lived, and the night had passed. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They came quietly, threaded through routine, hidden behind formal language and careful pauses. Amelia noticed them before anyone else did. Her access badge still worked, but only on certain doors now. Her name no longer appeared on the rotating duty board in the main hall. When she walked into a room, conversations didn't stop anymore. They shifted. Carefully. People chose their words. She finished another shift without incident. Then, another. The hospital had settled into a fragile normal. The attackers were gone. Repairs were underway. Fresh Marines rotated in, faces unmarked by the memory of gunfire in hospital corridors. But memory lingered in the people who'd been there. A surgeon approached Amelia near the medication room late one evening. He stood too straight, hands clasped behind his back like he was awaiting judgment. "I owe you an apology," he said. Amelia looked at him. "For what?" she asked. "For not listening," he said. "For thinking rank mattered more than results." She considered him for a moment. Then she nodded once. "Learn from it," she said. "That's enough." He exhaled, relief softening his shoulders. The administrator did not apologize. He avoided her entirely. When he did speak her name, it was always in rooms she wasn't in. That didn't stop the file. The one marked classified had not gone away. It had multiplied. Requests came in under the guise of medical reviews, staffing audits, and wellness assessments. Amelia answered them all with the same measured honesty that had carried her through worse interrogations in places without windows. Eventually, someone decided she was more useful elsewhere. The order arrived without warning. Temporary reassignment. Effective immediately. The charge nurse read it twice. Brow furrowed. "They're moving you," she said quietly. "No reason given." Amelia nodded. "Where?" the nurse asked. Amelia glanced at the paper. "Somewhere quieter," she said. Word spread faster than expected. A small group of Marines gathered near the exit as Amelia packed her locker. Not formally, not officially, just there. One of them stepped forward, the young corporal who had frozen during the attack. "They told us you were leaving," he said. "Yes," Amelia replied. "We wanted to say," he trailed off, searching for words. She saved him the trouble. "Do your job," she said. "Take care of each other. That's enough." He nodded, eyes bright. As Amelia slung her bag over her shoulder, the Navy officer who'd questioned her the night of the attack appeared in the doorway. "They'll never admit you were right," he said quietly. Amelia met his gaze. "They don't have to," she replied. He hesitated. "You could come back," he said, "officially, with rank, with authority." Amelia shook her head. "Authority makes people hesitate," she said. "I don't." He studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Outside, the transport vehicle waited with its engine running. As Amelia stepped into the desert air, she looked back once at the hospital. The concrete walls, the narrow windows, the place that had become a battlefield and then a classroom. She didn't smile. She didn't regret. The vehicle pulled away. Miles passed in silence. When Amelia finally allowed herself to rest her head against the window, exhaustion washed over her in full, not physical, something deeper. She closed her eyes. Images flickered, the seal's blood on her hands, the hesitation in the surgeon's eyes, the moment before she'd acted without permission. She would carry those moments. She always did. The transport stopped at a smaller facility just before dawn. Another hospital, another need. No one recognized her when she walked in. That was fine. Inside, a nurse glanced up from the desk. "You're the transfer?" she asked. "Yes," Amelia replied. The nurse smiled politely. "Welcome. We're short-staffed." Amelia nodded and tied her hair back. "I know," she said. As she stepped into the corridor, the familiar hum of machines greeted her again. Different walls. Same work. And somewhere far away, a Navy SEAL was alive because someone had ignored protocol when it mattered. The world kept moving. Amelia moved with it. The new facility didn't look like much. Low buildings, faded paint, a parking lot cracked by heat and neglect. It sat far from anything strategic, far from headlines, far from the kind of attention that followed blood and rank. That was why Amelia had been sent there. Inside, the hospital felt older than it was. Equipment hummed a little louder. Lights flickered a little longer before settling. The air smelled more strongly of antiseptic, as if cleanliness had to work harder here. Amelia signed in without ceremony. No one asked for her past. No one cared. She was issued a locker, a pager, and a schedule that ran long into the night. The charge nurse barely glanced up as she spoke. "We're overwhelmed," the woman said. "If you can keep up, you'll fit in." Amelia nodded. She always fit in. Within hours, she learned the rhythms of the place. Which doors stuck, which monitors lagged, which doctors listened, and which filled silence with authority instead of competence. She adapted. She always did. The patients here weren't special forces or high-value assets. They were mechanics, guards, contractors, and families living on the edge of a base that most people forgot existed. Pain didn't care about clearance levels. Blood didn't care about rank. Late that evening, a young medic brought in a civilian with shrapnel embedded deep in his thigh. The attending physician hesitated, flipping through protocol on a tablet while the man bled onto the floor. "We need imaging," the doctor said. "We don't have time," Amelia replied quietly. The doctor frowned. "And you are?" "A nurse," Amelia said. He scoffed. Amelia stepped forward anyway. By the time imaging finally came back, the bleeding was already controlled. The doctor didn't apologize. He didn't need to. 2 nights later, a child arrived with a collapsed lung after a vehicle accident on the perimeter road. Panic filled the room. Voices overlapped, hands shook. Amelia didn't raise her voice. She simply moved. The child lived. After that, people started to notice. Not her history. Her results. The staff didn't whisper about heroics or ask questions they weren't cleared to hear. They simply began to step aside when she entered a room, began to listen when she spoke. Not because she demanded it, because she earned it. One night, long after midnight, a Marine sat on a gurney holding his ribs, breathing shallow. "You're not from here," he said suddenly as Amelia adjusted his oxygen. "No," she replied. "Figured," he said. "You move like you've seen worse." Amelia didn't answer. He winced, then glanced at her again. "Where'd you learn to stay so calm?" She met his eyes. "By panicking when it was too late," she said. He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. News of the hospital attack traveled slowly, stripped of detail each time it passed from mouth to mouth. Armed men. A lockdown. Marines alive who shouldn't have been. No names, no nurse. That was intentional, but among certain circles, among people who recognized patterns instead of headlines, Amelia's presence was noted. Quietly. One evening, the facility received a visit from an unfamiliar officer. No entourage, No ceremony. He watched Amelia from across the ward as she worked. Didn't interrupt, didn't announce himself. When she finally stepped into the supply room to restock, he followed. "You don't stay anywhere long," he said. Amelia didn't turn. "Neither do you," she replied. He smiled faintly. "They speak well of you," he said. "They always do," she answered. After, he studied her posture, the way she held herself even off duty. "You could teach," he said. "Train people before the moment comes." Amelia considered that. "I do," she said. "Every shift." He nodded, accepting the answer. When he left, nothing changed, and that was exactly how Amelia wanted it. Days passed, then weeks. The facility stabilized. The staff grew more confident. Fewer mistakes were made. Not because Amelia fixed everything, because she made room for others to be better. One morning, she found a note in her locker. No signature, just a line written carefully. "Thank you for showing us how to act when it matters." She folded it and placed it back inside. She didn't keep souvenirs. On her next day off, Amelia sat alone on the steps outside the hospital, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky burned orange, then faded to purple. She felt the old pull again, the sense that this place, too, would soon move on without her. That was fine. She wasn't meant to stay. She was meant to arrive when things went wrong, and leave before they went wrong again. Somewhere far away, reports were still being filed, careers were still being corrected. By consequence, Amelia didn't track any of it. She stood, brushed dust from her hands, and went back inside. Another alarm chimed. Another life needed steady hands. And once again, Amelia answered. The truth rarely arrived the way people imagined it would. There was no announcement, no press conference, no official correction of the stories already half forgotten. It surfaced quietly, in fragments, carried by people who had been there and understood what they'd witnessed. A Marine recovering from surgery told another Marine that the nurse who saved him moved like someone trained for combat. A surgeon admitted reluctantly that a rookie had outperformed him under fire. A senior officer corrected a report with one extra sentence that changed everything. She acted with prior operational experience. That was all it took. Within certain channels, Amelia's name resurfaced. Cautiously, respectfully, always paired with the same note. Do not contact directly. At the smaller hospital, she felt the shift before she heard about it. New protocols arrived emphasizing rapid decision-making. Training modules appeared that mirrored things she demonstrated informally. The staff began running drills that looked suspiciously like battlefield triage. No one told her why. They didn't need to. One evening, as Amelia prepared to leave after a long shift, the charge nurse approached her holding a tablet. "Have you seen this?" she asked. Amelia shook her head. The nurse hesitated, then turned the screen. It was an internal bulletin. Not public, not meant for wide distribution. A summary of the hospital attack, stripped of specifics. But one line stood out. A civilian medical professional with prior special operations experience was instrumental in preventing mass casualties. The nurse looked at Amelia carefully. "That was you," she said. Amelia didn't deny it. "It doesn't matter," she replied. The nurse shook her head. "It matters to us." The next morning, a training session was added to the schedule. Voluntary, they said. Every nurse showed up. Amelia stood at the front of the room, uncomfortable in the spotlight. She didn't talk about weapons. She didn't talk about combat. She talked about decisions, about what fear does to fine motor skills, about how people freeze not because they're weak, but because their brain is trying to protect them, about how to move anyway. No rank, no war stories, just lessons. By the end, the room was silent. Not because she'd impressed them, because she'd prepared them. Later that week, the administrator from the first hospital lost his position. Officially, it was a restructuring. Unofficially, everyone knew why. The surgeon who'd shouted at Amelia during the attack was reassigned. Not as punishment, but as correction. He would teach now, under supervision. Some people learned best that way. Amelia found out by accident overhearing two doctors talking near the break room. She never even complained. One said, "Just did the work." "That's the worst part," the other replied. "Makes it impossible to justify what we did." Amelia stepped past them without comment. One evening, as she finished charting, a familiar voice spoke from behind her. "You never take credit." She turned. The Navy officer stood there, hands in pockets, expression thoughtful. "I take responsibility," Amelia said. "That's enough." He nodded. "They're rewriting protocols," he said, "using what you did as the model." "That's good," she replied. "You could help formally," he offered again. Amelia considered it longer this time. "I don't want people waiting for me," she said finally. "I want them acting without me." He smiled. "That might be the most special operations answer I've ever heard." She didn't smile back. As he left, she returned to her charting. Another alarm chimed. Another patient waited. Weeks later, the SEAL was transferred to a rehabilitation facility. Before he left, he asked for Amelia. They met briefly, no ceremony. "I owe you my life," he said simply. She shook her head. "You owe it to the people who keep showing up," she replied. He studied her. "Still hiding?" he asked. She met his gaze. "No," she said, "just standing where I'm needed." He nodded, satisfied. As the transport took him away, Amelia returned to the ward. Life went on. That was the point. The truth didn't make her larger than life. It made everyone else smaller for having missed it. And in the quiet spaces between emergencies, Amelia taught, healed, and waited, ready for the next moment when hesitation would cost too much. Amelia was offered 3 paths. They were presented in careful language, each option framed as an honor, a recognition of what she had done and who she had been. Return to service in an official capacity. Accept a permanent teaching position within military medicine. Remain where she was, under a special designation that would quietly protect her from interference. She listened without interrupting. The officer speaking waited for questions. Amelia didn't ask any. "I'll stay," she said. "Here," the officer clarified. "As I am." He studied her, then nodded. "Understood." That was the end of it. Nothing else needed to be said. At the hospital, Amelia's role shifted subtly. She wasn't promoted, she wasn't titled, but when things went wrong, people looked to her, not because she demanded leadership, because she embodied it. She began mentoring quietly, correcting a grip here, a decision there, asking questions that forced others to think before panic took hold. She never raised her voice. She never reminded anyone who she used to be. One afternoon, a young nurse froze during a code, hands trembling, eyes wide. Amelia stepped in beside her. "Breathe," she said softly. "Now move." The nurse moved. Later, she cried in the break room. Amelia sat with her until it passed. "That doesn't mean you're not cut out for this," Amelia said. "It means you care." The nurse nodded, wiping her face. The lesson stuck. Across the system, changes rippled outward. Faster response times, less deference to ego, more trust in observation over hierarchy. None of it bore Amelia's name. That was intentional. Months passed. The memory of the hospital attack faded from daily conversation, replaced by new crises, new lessons. But the people who had been there never forgot. Neither did Amelia. She still woke some nights to the echo of gunfire in hallways that smelled like antiseptic instead of dust. She still counted sometimes, not out of guilt, but habit. But she also slept more soundly than she had in years. One evening, as she walked out after another long shift, the sun setting low behind the buildings, a Marine approached her. "You probably don't remember me," he said. She studied his face. "I remember everyone," she replied. He smiled. "I froze," he said. "That night, I thought that meant I was useless." Amelia waited. "But then I remembered what you said," he continued. "Freezing isn't failure. It's what you do next." He straightened. "I didn't freeze last time." She nodded. "That's how it works," she said. As he walked away, Amelia felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not pride, something quieter. Completion, maybe. That night, she stood outside again, watching the stars come out one by one. She thought about all the places she'd been sent, all the times she'd arrived unnoticed and left without ceremony. She thought about the people who'd learned to act because she'd shown them how. This was her choice, not glory, not revenge, not recognition, service. When her pager went off again, she didn't sigh. She turned and went back inside. Time passed, the way it always did in places built around crisis. Not in days or weeks, but in shifts. Amelia measured her life now in the soft rhythms of routine. The hum of machines, the squeak of carts, the steady breathing of patients who were still alive because someone had noticed something small before it became fatal. She became part of the background. And that was exactly where she did her best work. New nurses arrived nervous and uncertain. Some lasted, some didn't. Amelia never judged either. She knew better than anyone that courage wasn't about staying. It was about knowing when you could no longer function without becoming dangerous. She trained those who stayed, not formally, not with manuals, with presence. She taught them how to enter a room and read it before touching anything. How to listen to monitors without trusting them blindly. How to recognize the moment when protocol had to bend or someone would die. She never framed it as heroism. One afternoon, a visiting physician from a larger facility observed her during a trauma intake. Afterward, he pulled the charge nurse aside. That woman should be running a department, he said. The charge nurse shook her head. She wouldn't want it. Why not? Because then she'd have to stop doing this, the nurse replied. He watched Amelia through the glass. Calm, precise, focused. He understood. Across the system, the ripple effects continued. The administrator who had dismissed her now worked in a quiet office far from patient care. His authority reduced to paperwork and policy. He spoke less now, listened more. The surgeon who'd shouted became a better teacher than he'd ever been a practitioner. Arrogance, once exposed, had nowhere to hide. Amelia heard none of this directly. She heard it the way she heard most things, in tone shifts, in changed behavior, in the absence of obstacles that used to stand in the way of action. That was enough. One night, a mass casualty drill was run without warning. Alarms blared. Simulated chaos filled the halls. Amelia watched from the edge as younger staff moved. They didn't freeze. They acted. Later, as the drill ended, a coordinator approached her. That went better than expected, he said. Amelia nodded. Because they were ready, she replied. Because of you, she shook her head. Because they chose to be. The difference mattered. On a quiet evening, Amelia sat alone in the break room, sipping coffee that had gone cold while she stared at nothing in particular. She thought about the uniform she no longer wore, about the people she'd lost while wearing it, about the lives she now saved without anyone needing to know why she was capable of it. She didn't miss the adrenaline. She didn't miss the noise. She missed the clarity. Here, in this role, she found something close to it. When the pager went off again, she rose without hurry. Another room, another patient, another chance to make the right decision before it was too late. That was the work. And then, one morning, a message arrived, simple, unadorned. A patient from the original hospital attack had recovered fully. He was returning to duty. Attached was a short note. Still here. Because of you. Amelia read it once, then deleted it. She didn't need reminders. The world didn't change because of her story. But in small rooms, in critical moments, lives bent away from disaster because someone had once been underestimated and had chosen to act anyway. These were the quiet heroes, the ones you didn't notice until the moment you needed them most. Amelia was content to remain one of them. The hospital never put up a plaque. No ceremony marked the night when everything could have ended differently. No official record listed the name of the nurse who stepped forward when hesitation would have cost lives. That was how Amelia wanted it. Months later, the corridors looked exactly the same as they always had. The paint still chipped in the same corners. The lights still flickered before settling. New faces replaced old ones, unaware of the history beneath their feet. But something had changed. People moved faster now, not recklessly, but decisively. They listened more. They argued less when seconds mattered. They trusted observation over ego. Amelia watched it happen from the margins. She never corrected stories when they drifted into exaggeration. She never confirmed them either. When someone asked her directly about that night, she answered simply, "I did my job." That answer frustrated people who wanted legends. It comforted the ones who wanted permission to act. One evening near the end of another long shift, Amelia stood at the window overlooking the parking lot. The sky was deepening into dusk, the kind of quiet hour where the world seems to pause between breaths. A young nurse stood beside her, watching the same view. "Do you ever wish people knew?" the nurse asked. Amelia considered the question carefully. "No," she said. "I wish people learned." The nurse nodded, absorbing the difference. When Amelia finally decided it was time to move on, she didn't announce it. She finished her charts, cleaned her locker, left her badge on the desk. The charge nurse found it later and understood. Somewhere else, another place would need her. And when it did, she would arrive the same way she always had. Quietly, unremarkably, underestimated. Until the moment came. Because the world is full of people who wait for permission, and a few who know when to act without it. Amelia was one of the latter. She walked out into the evening air, shoulders relaxed, steps steady. Behind her, the hospital continued its work. Ahead of her, the unknown waited. And somewhere, unseen and uncelebrated, another life would be saved because a calm nurse chose to move when others hesitated. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that the quietest people in the room often carry the heaviest responsibility, then remember this: courage doesn't announce itself. Competence doesn't demand applause. And heroes don't always look the part. Like, subscribe, and comment what you would have done.